Let me talk to you like you're sitting right beside me. No noise, no performance, just truth. You ever notice how the moment you stop trying, everything suddenly feels louder? Not on your phone. Not in your messages. But in the silence. Here's the uncomfortable truth most men aren't ready to hear. Avoidants don't fall apart when you chase them. They fall apart when you stop caring. That's not romantic. That's psychological. When you were explaining yourself, they felt safe. When you were asking for clarity, they felt in control. When you were trying to fix things, they knew exactly where you stood. But the day you emotionally clock out, calmly, quietly, without drama, you trigger something far deeper than heartbreak. You trigger uncertainty. And for an avoidant, uncertainty is terrifying. This is where most people get it wrong. They think silence hurts because it feels like punishment. That's not it. Silence hurts because it removes predictability. It removes access. It removes the emotional mirror they relied on to regulate themselves. And here's the controversial part no one says out loud. Avoidants often don't realize your value until you stop offering it. Not because they're evil. Not because they planned it. But because avoidance is built on distance, not awareness. So when you finally give up, not in anger, not to manipulate, but because something in you shuts down, something in them starts to crack open. Quietly. Internally. Slowly. They don't collapse in public. They don't beg right away. They don't suddenly become emotional experts. What happens is far more subtle and far more intense. Their mind enters a process. A sequence. A series of internal stages that most men never see because they're already gone by the time it starts. And this video isn't about glorifying that collapse. It's about understanding it. So you stop blaming yourself, stop chasing clarity from someone who avoids it, and start recognizing what actually happens when you choose self-respect over emotional survival. If you've ever wondered what goes on in an avoidant's mind the moment they realize you're really done, this is where it begins. Let me start this one the same way, like I'm talking directly to you. You didn't argue. You didn't beg. You didn't send a long emotional message. You just stopped. And here's the part most men never realize. That moment hits an avoidant harder than any confrontation ever could. For an avoidant, control doesn't come from dominance. It comes from distance. From knowing they can pull away and you'll still be there. From knowing that if things get uncomfortable, they can shut down, and you'll compensate emotionally. So when you give up calmly, the very first thing that happens inside their mind is shock. Not sadness. Not regret. Shock. Because the pattern they depended on is broken. They were used to you being the emotional constant. The one who checked in. The one who tried to fix misunderstandings. The one who kept the emotional door open even when they slammed it shut. And suddenly, that door is closed. Not angrily, not dramatically, but firmly. This is where the internal collapse starts. At this stage, they don't think, I lost them. They think, why isn't this working anymore? That's important. Avoidants are wired to minimize emotional impact. So instead of feeling the loss immediately, their brain searches for explanations that protect their sense of control. They tell themselves things like, they're just busy. They'll reach out eventually. This is just another phase. But deep down, something feels off. The silence feels different. Heavier. Final. And that's because for the first time, they're not the one choosing distance. You are. That role reversal is destabilizing. You see, avoidants regulate themselves by controlling closeness. When they decide how close or far things go, they feel safe. But when you remove yourself emotionally, that safety system fails. This is why they may suddenly start watching you more closely, checking your activity, noticing changes in your tone, replaying conversations. Not because they miss you yet, but because they don't understand why their usual strategy stopped working. And here's the controversial truth men need to hear. Most avoidants don't realize they're losing someone until they can't access them emotionally anymore. They don't feel relief at this stage. They feel disoriented. They may even appear calm on the outside, unbothered, normal. But internally, their mind is scrambling to regain footing. Because control loss doesn't feel like pain to an avoidant. It feels like danger. At this stage, they are not reflecting deeply. They are not growing. They are not suddenly self-aware. They are trying to restore balance.
And that's why many men misread this moment.
They think, see? They don't care. No. They care, but not in the way you expect yet.
This stage is the moment the emotional game board flips. The moment the avoidant realizes, consciously or not, that something fundamental has changed.
You're no longer available in the way they relied on. And once that realization settles in, the ego steps in. That's where stage 2 begins. Let's keep this grounded and honest, because this stage is where most men get confused.
Once the initial shock wears off, the avoidant mind doesn't move into accountability.
It moves into protection, and the tool it uses is the ego.
At this stage, they don't ask, "What did I do wrong?"
They ask, "How do I explain this in a way that keeps me comfortable?" This is where reality starts getting rewritten internally. The silence you created doesn't feel like loss yet. It feels like a threat to identity. And the ego's job is simple: reduce discomfort at all costs. So instead of facing the emotional meaning of your absence, the mind starts reframing it. They tell themselves, "They were too emotional anyway. This would have ended eventually. I need peace, not pressure." Now here's the controversial part men need to understand. Some of these thoughts sound logical, but they're not honest. They're defenses.
Avoidants are incredibly good at intellectualizing emotions.
They turn feelings into explanations. They turn attachment into inconvenience. They turn your needs into drama. Not because you were wrong, but because minimizing you keeps them regulated. So during this stage, they may appear more confident, more detached, more certain. This is where you might see them post more, seem lighter, even appear relieved. But don't mistake ego confidence for emotional resolution. What's actually happening is this: their mind is building a story where your absence isn't meaningful, because if it is meaningful, then they'd have to feel it. And feeling it would mean vulnerability.
And vulnerability, to an avoidant, feels unsafe.
So the ego steps in and says, "We didn't lose anything important."
Here's where men often make a mistake. They try to interrupt this stage by reaching out,
clarifying, explaining, reopening communication. And the moment you do that, you give the ego exactly what it wants: confirmation that it didn't lose control after all. Your silence is what forces the ego to work overtime. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Ego narratives collapse when there's no emotional feedback. They can't fully convince themselves you didn't matter if you're not reacting, not chasing, not correcting their assumptions. So internally, tension builds. The story they're telling themselves doesn't quite match how they feel, but they're not ready to admit that yet. This is also why this stage can last a while. Days, weeks, sometimes longer. The avoidant is holding on to the version of reality that keeps them emotionally intact. But it's fragile. It depends on you staying silent and unavailable. And slowly, without them realizing it, the cracks begin to show. Because once the ego runs out of explanations, emotion has nowhere else to go. That's when the noise starts. And that's exactly what stage 3 is about. At this point, something shifts internally, and it's subtle, but powerful. The ego has done its job for as long as it can. The explanations are still there, but they don't land the same way anymore. The certainty fades. The calm starts to feel forced.
And underneath it all, a low-level emotional noise begins.
Not dramatic emotion. Not sadness the way you'd recognize it. Just discomfort. This is where the avoidant starts feeling something they're not used to sitting with: unresolved emotional pressure. They don't suddenly miss you in a romantic, movie-style way. What they feel first is disturbance. A mental restlessness. A sense that something is unfinished. Their mind keeps circling the same thoughts without resolution. They're not thinking, "I want them back." They're thinking, "Why doesn't this feel settled?" And that's important. Avoidants are used to shutting things down internally. When something ends, they expect emotional relief. But this time, relief doesn't come. The silence you created doesn't fade. It echoes. They start becoming more aware of absence, not presence. Less grounded. More internally distracted. Even when they're busy, something feels off. Even when they're social, the noise doesn't fully go quiet. It's not loud enough to confront,
but it's persistent enough to irritate.
This is where internal contradiction shows up. Part of them still wants to believe the story they told themselves in stage 2. Another part of them keeps noticing that you're not there anymore. And the mind doesn't like unresolved contradictions. So they begin revisiting emotional impressions. Not to feel them fully, but because they won't stop resurfacing. The connection starts appearing in unexpected moments. Not as longing, but as mental interruption. Here's the key thing men need to understand. Avoidants don't process emotions linearly, they process them indirectly. So instead of feeling grief, they feel agitation. Instead of missing you clearly, they feel unsettled. Instead of regret, they feel internal friction. And because they're not used to staying with emotional discomfort, this stage feels exhausting for them. They may question themselves, not deeply, but enough to feel unstable. They may feel more irritable, less emotionally grounded, less certain of their previous conclusions. But they still don't externalize it. This is an internal experience. Quiet, invisible, confusing. And this is where many men finally stop blaming themselves, because they realize something important. Your silence didn't create chaos. It revealed it. The emotional noise was always there. Your presence just helped regulate it. Now, without you doing that work for them, they're left with it alone. And eventually, that leads to a moment they've been avoiding the entire time. The mirror. That's where stage 4 begins. This is the stage most men never hear about, because it's uncomfortable for everyone involved. Up until now, everything has been internal deflection. Now comes internal confrontation. Not emotional confession. Not sudden vulnerability. Just a quiet moment where the avoidant can no longer outrun themselves. This is the mirror moment. And here's where I'm going to be very calm, but very honest, with you as a man. When the avoidant finally looks inward, they don't just see the relationship. They see your consistency next to their distance. They see your effort next to their avoidance. They see your emotional presence next to their withdrawal. And that contrast is unsettling. But before we go any further, men need to hear this part clearly. If you stayed too long, tolerated too much, or over-explained yourself repeatedly, this stage exists partly because you allowed imbalance to become normal. That's not blame. That's responsibility. Avoidants don't wake up magically. They wake up when the emotional environment changes. And for many men, that change comes late, after self-abandonment. So yes, the avoidant now feels discomfort. Yes, they're starting to recognize patterns. But you should also recognize yours. This stage isn't about waiting for them to grow. It's about you realizing why you accepted inconsistency in the first place. Internally, the avoidant begins asking quieter questions. Why do people always leave? Why does closeness feel threatening? Why do I feel exposed now? These questions don't lead to instant answers, but they crack the identity they were hiding behind. And here's the controversial truth. Not every avoidant uses this moment to change. Some use it to harden. That's why this stage matters more for you than for them. Because if you're still emotionally waiting at this point, hoping they'll suddenly meet you halfway, you miss the lesson. The wake-up call isn't for them alone. It's for you. Men need to stop confusing patience with strength. Stop confusing emotional tolerance with loyalty. Stop calling self-betrayal love. Calm truth. If someone only reflects when you leave, that relationship was already unstable. So here's the advice. Quiet, grounded, and direct. If they come back from this stage with curiosity, accountability, and consistency, observe, don't rush. If they come back defensive, distant, or vague, don't re-enter the cycle. Because stage 4 is the point where clarity becomes unavoidable. For them. And for you. And once this moment passes, one final shift happens inside the avoidant. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent collapse. That's stage 5. This final stage doesn't look like what most men expect. There's no dramatic apology, no emotional breakdown, no sudden transformation into the partner you needed. What happens instead is much quieter, and much more unsettling. At this point, the avoidant has lost something they didn't know they were relying on. The version of themselves that felt safe because you were emotionally available. Their old identity was built on a simple belief.
I can keep distance, and people will still stay.
But now that belief no longer holds. And when an identity stops working, it doesn't explode, it collapses inward. This is where the internal structure they use to navigate relationships starts breaking down. The avoidance still exists, but it no longer feels empowering. It feels empty, defensive, repetitive. They may still act detached. They may still say they're fine. They may even continue life as usual. But internally, something is gone. The emotional leverage they unconsciously relied on, your patience, your consistency, your willingness to stay, no longer exists. And without that stabilizer, their emotional world feels thinner. Here's the controversial truth men need to hear clearly. This collapse doesn't always lead to growth. Sometimes it leads to emotional numbness. Some avoidants use this stage to finally reflect and change patterns over time. Others double down on independence, telling themselves they're better alone. But either way, the old version of them, the one who felt in control through distance, no longer functions the same way. And this is where your role fully ends. If you're still watching from afar, still wondering if they regret losing you, still hoping this collapse will turn into realization, you're missing the real point. This stage is not about them choosing you. It's about you realizing something important as a man. You were not abandoned because you were too much. You were left because you were available in a system that rewards distance. And once you removed yourself from that system, it broke. Not loudly, not publicly, but permanently. This is why avoidants sometimes resurface months later, not with clarity, but with confusion. They don't return because they've healed. They return because the old identity never fully rebuilt. And by then, if you've done your work, you no longer fit into their emotional structure. That's the quiet collapse. No villain. No winner. Just the end of a dynamic that only survived because you held it up. And that's why this stage matters most. Not for understanding them, but for finally understanding yourself. Here's the controversial truth I want to leave you with, and I want you to really sit with this. Some people don't lose you because they didn't love you. They lose you because your presence made it too easy for them not to change. Read that again. The avoidance internal collapse isn't a victory story. It's not karma. It's not proof that you won. It's simply what happens when emotional imbalance finally runs out of fuel. And if we're being honest as men, this video isn't really about them. It's about the moment you stopped betraying yourself to keep someone comfortable. You didn't walk away because you were weak. You walked away because you got tired of carrying a connection alone. If any part of this felt uncomfortably familiar, that's not coincidence. That's awareness waking up. Now I want to hear from you. Have you experienced this shift? Did someone only seem affected once you truly stopped trying? Or did you realize something about yourself when you finally let go? Drop your experience in the comments. I read them, and I do reach out. This channel isn't about judgment. It's about clarity, growth, and men learning how to choose self-respect without becoming closed off. If this connected with you, stay here. You're not alone, and this conversation doesn't end when the video does.